3 uses for wool socks. As we're getting into colder weather here in the United States, getting close to the mid-fall, we're kind of experiencing, especially in the mornings and late afternoons, a drop in temperature, which is normal. And so what are 3 different things we can use with wool socks? Typically, outdoors people really do prefer wool blends or sometimes 100% wool. But for me personally, I think maybe something like an 80% wool, and the rest could be a mixture of polyester and maybe a little bit of stretch. Maybe have some elastic in there. So the reason is because you want to have some wicking property with the sock to help pull moisture away from the body, and then you'd have the insulator, which would be the wool. So wool blends for socks are really not a problem. It's just for those who need maximum heat conservation, would go toward a higher percent of wool, and that's up to you. But you just have to be mindful, though, that you have to stay dry to stay warm. And so you don't want to be sweating if you have 100% wool socks. The other part of this is that you can always double up on some things. For example, with hats, you could go with a face mask and a toboggan, and it could be a wool toboggan and maybe a type of polyester or even polar fleece face mask, and you can double up where your ears are. Same thing with your hands. You can double up. Typically they say go with gloves first and then put oversized mittens over your gloves for maximum protection. But when we're talking about wool socks, the first thing is obviously going to be you can double up for your feet. 2 layers of wool socks, even if they're blends, will go a long way to giving you good resistance to frostbite or overexposure. The second use you can use for wool socks is you can put them over your hands, especially if you don't have gloves, or maybe you do have gloves, but they're not, there's a lot of gloves that aren't very good in terms of keeping your hands warm. I like polar fleece gloves and I like wool gloves. I kind of go back and forth. But if all you have is maybe a pair of mechanics gloves, and we know that they are not very good in terms of holding heat. So if you have some very, very thin gloves, you can just take an extra pair of wool socks and put them over and make it like a makeshift mitten. And so that can kind of get you through, especially if you're just hiking and you don't really have any needs for your dexterity of your hands or use, and you just need to kind of just create a barrier. It's just a real quick way to go. And lastly, if you have things maybe like electronics or things with batteries in it, or maybe they're just spare batteries, and you want to keep them from discharging or potentially getting colder so that they won't sometimes function in certain electronics if they're voltage sensitive. You can put those electronics or batteries in a sock or even in 2 socks and put them in a pocket close to your body to keep it warmer. And they can go a long way as well. So socks, just are an amazing thing. Just like a lot of other pieces of clothing, you can adapt. And don't forget that you can double up on a lot of things, and to create more of like not just a barrier, more of a barrier between the cold elements and the wind chill, but also to trap air in between. And when that air gets warmed up from our body heat and stuff from our body, it actually just helps as an insulator. So it's important to have a little dead space, a little bit of dead air, especially even in your coats. There's nothing wrong with getting maybe a size larger than you need. You don't want a coat that's real snug. You want something that has a little bit of room. You want something that can trap air. And that's why there's a lot of these quilted types of, jackets and coats and that you see around wintertime. And even though it looks kind of sporty and it looks good, which is cool, but it also has a real purpose. There's a lot of density there to hold air. And so, there's a lot of pockets of air, I should say, that can hold dead air, and that just acts as a barrier, between you and the environment. So just remember that. I always try to carry an extra pair of socks, sometimes several, when I go out on a colder day, and as well as use wool for the colder days. And sometimes on my extra socks, though, I'll carry an oversized pair of socks. Some people don't have a problem at all because of their shoe size, The traditional socks can work if, no problem if you double them up. My foot is typically on that outer edge of, since I wear a size 13, a lot of socks stop at size 12, but I typically can make them work. I can just squeeze into them and it's okay, but trying to double up on a size 12 sock for me just doesn't typically work very well at all. So what I typically do is just get one pair of normal socks and then I get an oversized pair of socks that are made for like size 14 or 15. And then that's very comfortable over top of the standard sock. And so you don't want to constrict your feet, constrict the blood flow. That will minimize also heat transfer because you would interfere with the blood flow. And the blood does kind of, help bring heat from the core of the body. And so you have to be mindful to keep that, relaxed and loose, especially your shoes. You definitely want that to be comfortable and allow flow of blood. And also, if you can, even have, more trapped air in the shoe. Of course, you don't want your shoe flopping around, but I think some of the better ways to go is get an insulated boot, especially a boot that it doesn't have to be like a really tall type of boot of, full length military style. Not at all. But maybe like a quarter height or something that at least goes up maybe a few inches above your ankle is kind of what I would recommend. Maybe a really good hiking boot. And that can go a long way, especially if it's insulated and waterproofed, to really just keep that air out, keep moisture out. And they also have some that are very breathable, and maybe you may have like Gore-Tex and various types of materials so that it can keep the moisture out, but it can also release moisture. And those are really nice and something that you might want to really invest in. They're not always very cheap at all. In fact, they typically are pretty expensive. But just like wool socks are much more expensive than just cotton socks, and I would avoid cotton socks. There's a reason why things cost more. They give you a lot more, value for the money and a lot more performance. So it's just some quick tips here about clothing and doubling up. Just some things that I've done in the past that have worked. Thanks for watching.